So many teachers are complaining about the lack of discipline in the class. Your learners are not engaged, they're off task, they're busy with behavior that's disrupting the classroom, and teachers are feeling that it's becoming worse. Now, what if I told you that we need to take a new approach, or at least a different approach, that if in your classroom you're still struggling with discipline, that there might be solutions that we can implement in the classroom from theory and from research that we haven't explored before. Maybe the answer to the challenges is in a place where we haven't looked before. And that's why I'm doing these kind of videos, these kind of interviews, that's going to try and expose us to more of these kind of research or more of these kind of practices that might just work in your classroom. My name is Francois Nodia, and I am a teacher coach, and I want to assist you in teaching like the superhero that you really are. Now, when it comes to classroom discipline, when it comes to engagement, it really is a sticky matter, especially when many teachers think about this generational divide and we wonder, how can we really break through to our learners? And I thought I want to speak to an expert. I want to speak to somebody who has solved the challenge around the approach to classroom management and an approach that helps engage learners. And for that, my friend from America, Mitch Weathers, who is the founder of Organized Binder, and we'll speak more about this, but Mitch has taken a very unique approach to learning and structuring the school day, but also the lessons and structuring the class time that we spend with our learners, because he felt when he was at school, he was a passive participant. Like, all the learning and everything was designed to happen around you and not necessarily include you. So when Mitch became a teacher, he took it from the experience that he had in the classroom in not wanting his learners to be passive in the classroom, but how can we involve and engage learners with setting the foundations of learning by understanding what learning, what conditions are needed for learning, and then building lessons around this. So Mitch designed Organized Binder to empower teachers with a simple but research-backed strategy to teach students executive functioning skills while protecting the time needed for content instruction. And this approach around executive functions is what Mitch and I will be speaking about in today's interview, and that when we start building from the research-based approach of executive functions and understanding executive functions, we can definitely improve the engagement and therefore the discipline in the classroom. I hope you'll enjoy this interview. Stay super. Mitch, the challenge in classrooms, especially in South Africa, and the teachers that I work with, is immense. I've told you before in the meetings that we've had that we've got teachers sitting with 60 learners in their classroom, some 70, 80 learners in their classroom. And all of the teachers that I work with, we're seeing an increase in people complaining about the discipline of the learners, not being able to teach like we want to teach. And in essence, it comes down to crowd control. We're just managing the numbers in the classroom, which we know isn't really conducive to teaching. And you've got a very unique angle when it comes to learning, when it comes to classroom management, and the focus is a lot on executive function. So I thought maybe as part of the start of our discussion, tell us what is executive functions, and why do you believe that's kind of the key to unlocking the discipline or classroom management issues in a classroom?
All right. Well, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I enjoy talking with you. And so executive functions, if you were to just kind of distill it down into a term that I like to use in schools we work with, actually kind of wordsmithed it, but called studentness. You think of like all the things students need to be able to do in order to be successful with whatever it is they're trying to learn. So this, what research has really pointed to is a specific set of skills and habits that really kind of lay the foundation for learning. And executive functioning is in some ways kind of an umbrella term. And we can look at executive functions in different categories or verticals if you like. But in terms of teaching and learning, in terms of the classroom or this education space, there's six that my work really focuses on to, and we can unpack that in a little bit, but it's this ability to be able to juggle multiple tasks, to create a plan and execute or follow through on that plan. The ability to organize myself, both time and materials. So a lot of those kind of working habits, and where it crosses over with executive functioning, there's two lenses that I would look at. First, we looked at the student, in particular coming off of the last 2 years, and then only complicated if I'm in a learning environment with 70 other students and one teacher. I mean, that's a daunting. I've taught classes of over 40, but that's like next level, right? And when students find themselves, and this is where I think the pandemic has kind of put an exclamation point on this, in a place when they're in their learning environment, in their learning experience, but they don't really know how to jump into it. So it's kind of like they're experiencing their schooling as a passive object. Like, I'm here and it's happening all around me, but I lack that agency, or the word I like to use is like dexterity. Like, how do I like jump into this? So I move from being, a passive object into like an active subject or participant.
I like to say it there. It's very important for me, because I experience this in the classroom, is that our learners are, I think the colloquial term that people will use, like kids are expecting to be spoon-fed. Like sitting in the classroom, being very passive, and the teacher is talking at me. There's content that needs to be learned. And I like what you say, is like everything's happening around me, but it's not necessarily happening to me, and I'm not happening to it.
Right. And that, if you experience that, one, it's very isolating. It's kind of defeating. And if that's been my experience academically, year after year after year, it can not always, but oftentimes devolve down into off-task behavior, which can lead, of course, to management issues. And so the nuance here that I really focus on in my work is, one, building this sense of student agency. Like, I can do this, I got this, and kind of regardless of what I'm learning, right? But the way executive functions, let me say it a better way. Executive functions aren't really taught. They're actually best learned when I see them explicitly modeled and I get practice employing them in a no stakes way. And what I mean by no stakes is it's not going to influence my grade or my success in this course. So what I mean by modeling is I have to see them, but I need to get practice with them by virtue of a predictable daily learning routine. Okay, that could be a classroom routine, whatever that environment is. And once the educator or the teacher creates a predictable structure, I like to call like a rhythm to the day, but it's consistent. Every day and it's simple. It's like we begin this way, we transition this way, our stuff gets stored in this way. Like it's the same rhythm every day. And of course, we're plopping different content as we're progressing through the course or the standards or whatever it might be, but it's that predictableness, the predictable rhythm to the class. So here I am as a student who I'm experiencing kind of dysregulation. I don't have a lot of agency, that jumping in, but all of a sudden I find myself in a learning routine where I know what to do to engage with the class community. Now again, I still might be struggling with whatever it is we're trying to learn. That's a different conversation than here's the rhythm and routine. I know what to do, and students are more likely to engage when they know what to do. And there's some accountability to that. But by creating this predictable rhythm, I believe we create safer learning environments where students are more likely to take risks inherent to learning. And all this rhythm, this routine to the day, if by virtue of engaging in that routine, I get practice with executive functions, it's kind of a win-win. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think what's happening in the classrooms that I've experienced, the mentor teachers I've worked with, the intern teachers that I've worked with, is we see the symptoms of the disease. We see the disengagement. We see the lack of discipline. We see the off-task behavior, but I don't think we spend a lot of time on what is causing this. And I extremely enjoy the fact that you've mentioned that if we want our learners to be on task, they need to have these developed executive functions. But they're not going to just learn it magically. It's not going to be transferred to them magically. And I think that's what we expect. It's like, I'm just going to continue with teaching like I've always been teaching. And the learners it's their responsibility to be engaged and be on task. Now, you said we should explicitly model the executive functions. I want you to unpack that and give us an example of what you mean by making that explicit.
Yeah, that's a great question. And to the point of like leaving it up to chance, a great quote I heard somewhere, was that, we would never leave the skill of reading or writing up to chance. Like, I hope you just figure that one out, right? Figure out how to read all on your own. And the same is true of these executive functions, but historically we have. It's like, well, you just kind of pick them up as you go through life. But what we're seeing is different lived experiences may lend themselves to developing some of them and others are not. And so there's an inequity there that we need to address. But in terms of being explicit, the program that I designed, and I know this conversation is not about organized binder, but it when you talk about explicitly modeling, I want to hold one up. I wish I had one or screen share, because it literally is these are best learned, like I said, when you see them and you get to practice with them. And so because of that discovery, I created this program for my students at the time. This is, well over a decade now. And it literally is a physical binder, and it's all color coded for visual cueing, nonverbal visual cueing in the class. And there's 8 tabs in the binder. They're A, B, C, D. They're just by letters. And it's all for cueing. So, and everything, like I said, our starting routine. We begin with something called a kickoff, which is nothing new. It's a prompt, a question of the day, a do now, a catalyst. I heard this great term just this week, actually, called kilo from Hawaii, which is a Hawaiian educator was telling me about it, that like before you begin something, stop and observe and reflect. Know where you are in that space, but also kind of where you came from. And that's like with organized binder, for us, the kickoff is about, I first came up with that term because I play soccer and my students at the time played soccer. They're all second language learners, mostly from outside of the US. I'm US based. And they would just show up with nothing from the previous day. I could tell there's no connections being made that what we did today is connected to what we're doing tomorrow or what we learned yesterday. And just to highlight this idea of being explicit is I would say, hey, like, you don't just show up to a soccer match, and run out on the field and start the game just because you showed up, right? You show up and you get ready and you put your gear on and you're warming up. The other team's doing that. The officials come, and all of this is happening, and you don't even think about it anymore because you've been doing this your whole life. It's moved into your subconscious, moved from your conscious brain into your subconscious. You just do it. And there's one thing and you don't think about it much, is that you better be ready when the whistle blows for the sake of your team. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of said, hey, what if we looked at our class as a team? Because here's the deal. Learning is the same as soccer. You have to know when you're ready to engage. So here's the good news. I'm going to show you what that looks like in this class every day until it just becomes routine. And so I would do this. I would say, here's what it looks like to be on time or be ready to engage with this learning community in this little space. I would grab a kid, and I wouldn't say anything. I'd grab a kid's binder, walk over, grab some kid's binder. I'd walk out of the room real quick. I'd walk back in, find some empty place to sit. If there was a desk or something. I'd open my binder. We start on the B tab. It's something called the Weekly Lifeline. It's white. The goals page in front of it is gold. The one behind it's green, which is our agenda, like our planning. I wouldn't say anything. I would just sit there and I'd close the binder and I'd return it to the kid. I'd walk back up to the front of the class and I'd say, okay, now turn to your neighbor and tell them what it means to be on time in this class. And it would erupt into conversation. And then I would just ask a few kids and I'd be like, it's that simple. You have to. So what that means is you show up with enough time to grab your binder or bring your binder, have it here. Do you need to sharpen your pencil? Do you need to chat with your friend? Do you need to check in with me? But every single day. Now, that's those explicit modeling. And when I have a kickoff, what we do, what we train teachers in our trainings is take a moment to reteach and revisit the previous lesson or lessons, objectives or standards, because we know research is very clear that the more explicit we are about the learning objective of the lesson, the more likely students are to get it. So what was the objective on Friday? Let's pretend it's Monday and we're here all together and I have 80 of you in the room. What did we do last time? Because if I don't know, there's definitely a lack of clarity, which is going to lead to off-task behavior, which is that's where management issues can breed, right? So if I can take that objective from just the previous lesson and distill it down into a prompt that gives me the chance to reteach it, and it gives students the chance to get their questions answered. But what's happening is they're using something called retrieval practice. This is like the cognitive science of it, which I think is so fascinating. Retrieval practice, which is just going back and grabbing something, right? Recalling facts, whatever we experienced. But they use something called working memory, which is an executive function, right?
Yeah.
And working memory is the ability to hold something in like cognitive space long enough to utilize it or make connections with something or whatever, like that space, okay? Now, every single day we're starting with this kickoff. It's our rhythm and routine. There's no ambiguity, total clarity, color-coded. Everything's up, this projected in a classroom if you have projection technology. What I see up there is exactly what's in my binder. All the while, so that's helping with like predictability. But students, we know from working memory, a couple things. It's finite, so I have to reduce the cognitive load. And here's another thing. When students are struggling with self-regulation and dysregulation and this lack of agency, they spend more cognitive energy or mental calories just navigating the school day. Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Right? And there's a certain cognitive load there that taxes your working memory. So the more predictable, when I reduce that friction, I have more capacity now in my working memory to interact with the stuff I'm trying to learn. Okay. And the coolest thing about working memory is we know it can get stronger the more I utilize it. And we also know that working memory is tied to attentional skills. So the stronger and the more like capacity in my working memory, my better I have of an ability to pay attention. And I don't think I need to make the connections between my ability to pay attention and classroom management issues.
Absolutely.
Do you see how this all swirls together?
So that was quite a mouthful, and I think it's important that we.
Sorry.
No, for sure. I think it's very important to understand how a routine like this, how the kick-off metaphor that we're using here is, from a neurological point of view, forming the foundation of learning. And that's why I came about with the symptom of the disease versus the cause of the disease, is that the cause of it is that the working memory hasn't had enough time to develop. The working memory is underdeveloped. The cognitive load is all over the place because we've got, issues from home, the socio-economical challenges that's taking up cognitive load. We've got the social interaction I have with friends or a girlfriend or a boyfriend at the school, or just thinking about the bully during break time. That's already taking up chunks of my cognitive load. And now the teacher still also expects of me to use the little bit that's left of my cognitive bandwidth and spend that on learning. where we, from the teacher side, we need to ensure that that bandwidth that we require is kind of uninterrupted. Is that we make sure that we don't contribute to more of the cognitive load. So when we introduce the routines, when we make sure that every single time we do things in a similar fashion, and where its teachers aren't all over the place, that allows them to tap into what remains of their working memory. And the more we let them recall what we've done, as you said, what was the objectives of the previous lesson? What do I need to reteach? When we recall that information, it also helps us to remember that information and apply that information. So the more we structure and have a structured classroom, a routine-based classroom, the less challenges we would have when it comes to off-task behavior, discipline challenges, classroom management.
Right. I have a saying that I use is that classroom management is more about clarity than authority, right? And classroom management is more about clarity, which is that predictable routine, right? Because there's certain infringements on my cognitive capacity that a teacher can't control. Like you mentioned it, like my home experience, my own identity and development as a young person, like that all of that swirled around. And then you take 2 years of complete uncertainty. You take, are we going to have, for your reality right now, right? Like, are we going to have power? Like, I'm sure there's families for whom, when the power is not there, it impacts their life more significantly than others, and that's a socioeconomic thing. Like, all of that is part of what's going on, and it is taxing that working memory. And that's where what I've seen, and I've worked with students who've struggled on all. I mean, similar students, let's just say. And when they find themselves in a safer learning environment, so it's like, I know what to do to be a part of this learning community. I'm held accountable to do it. So for my classroom or schools we work with, as simple as it sounds, it's actually quite profound. It's like, you have to have your binder, like because you're part of this learning community. And when you're not here, or you don't have your binder and can't engage with us in the same capacity, it changes this community. And there's a certain people, we want to belong, right? When students, I'd have students, my binder's in my locker, or I forgot it. And okay, if they can go get it, fine. And of course, I'm not going to keep them out of the class, but I'd make a point to be like, hey, you're part of this community, and we need you. And there's a certain, I'm wanted here, and that predictability in terms of creating safety. So many students, for life outside of school, is anything but predictable. Where they might be like managing chaos, and so they're living in a low level or fight or flight. So talk about taxing the cognitive load. Like we didn't evolve to live in a constant state of fight or flight, right? But when I find myself in a space with a smiling, loving adult who wants me there, even if they're forcing that smile because I'm in a bad mood as a teacher, or you pissed me off yesterday or whatever, like young people need that, I think, to be more successful. It's all that foundation of learning. And then, not that content and curriculum and objectives aren't, of course, paramount, but they're second. They're always, in my opinion, they're always secondary. This conversation is primary.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we want to develop learners that are capable of going into the real world, either finding employment or being entrepreneurs, and being valuable to an employer or to the economy. And you're not going to do that. You're not going to be one of those people if you aren't punctual and ready to kick off when you need to kick off, when you're sitting meetings and you're off task and you're on your cell phone and you're doing. So it really translates from the classroom into the real world. But now the question I wanted to ask you is, if I'm as an individual teacher do this in my class, of course there's benefits to this, but doing this like on a whole school level, getting all the staff on board, having the same methodology to classroom management, to the like you said, if you start off with the kickoff and then have the same procedures as we go, that's going to take off a lot of cognitive load from the learners, because now when they come to my class, they know what to expect, because they get that from the mathematics class, they get that from the language class. Doesn't matter where they go, they are doing exactly the same thing. So how do we get the whole staff to adopt or understand this?
Yeah, that's a really good point that you made, and it amplifies the impact of this work when students experience it from grade level to grade level or class to class, because it's that agency piece, like, oh, I know what to do here. And immediately, because that's moved from my conscious into my subconscious, I can focus on whatever it is I'm learning. Because of course that classroom is going to have a different culture, a different curriculum, a different subject that we're learning. But freeing up that working memory, that capacity, because I just know what to do to engage, that's that studentness. And so how do you get a staff to buy in? Well, not so much buy-in, it's just about training. I mean, most teachers are doing aspects of this. So in our work, it's the 6 executive functions are working memory, planning and time management, organizational skills, which are key, goal setting, self-regulation, and accountability, right? So there's got to be some accountability to all this, right? That's routine and what they're creating. And you'll find when in visiting a school or a district or a county, however, whatever the setup is, that there might be little parts of some of this work happening in classrooms independently. But most schools, classrooms are like a silo and nobody knows what's going on in there. And if we can, in a sense, come together and say like, wow, this has a significant impact. Now, here's the real truth, is this organizes teachers. So if a teacher implements the strategies embedded in Organized Binder, they end the year, so students do too. Students create a course long, so that could be school year or semester if it's a college level, or whatever the time frame is, a course long portfolio, evidence of their learning from the first day to the last day, right? And that's all about the organizational skills. But so because it's modeled, teachers have a class sample that's there. This is what your binder should look like if you ever need to look at it. And we do periodic checks to make sure they stay organized. But so when teachers get to the end of the school year, they have a portfolio. And imagine what that means now for subject area collaboration or grade level collaboration, where what do we do with that? You know, and I mean, and then literally, Francois, here's the beginning prompt that's tied to what we've previously learned. And then we talk about the lesson for the day. So we do some like calendaring, planning, and then we organize ourselves. Like it literally, I was a department chair of my department for many, many years. And if I hired somebody new, I would hand them a portfolio and say, here's your curriculum for the whole year, every day, mapped. And this is what we're all doing. I want you to focus on getting to know your students and creating this routine. Don't focus on the curriculum. Next year, if you want to change it, and have at it. But right now, if you're brand new, right? So that's just all about training and getting everybody on board to adopt a predictable routine. Here's the key. School-wide, this is the key. Teachers should be independent. We are independent, right? We want to change the world one human at a time. That's why we're doing this. But we're creative, and you should be. But you can adopt a predictable, similar, or identical routine if it has a very small time footprint in your lesson, right? So for our work, it's the first few moments and the last few moments that we're really going to utilize to create this routine. And here's the deal. That's historically the most underutilized class time or school time. Those first few moments and those last few moments. And by creating structure there, teachers report back that they have more time to deliver their content, right? So the buy-in, I got to be honest, most educators hear this and they're like, of course, we need, yeah, that sounds right. Now we're using a common language, we're using a common routine, we're seeing these same portfolios. It has a profound impact on school culture. And there's one other piece I'm going to just throw in there real quick because I'm passionate about it. You can engage families in this work too, of supporting the development of these executive functions. So now you're engaging families in a way that's not tied to content. Because schools we work with here in the States will say that, depending on the community they're serving, fourth, fifth, sixth grade in math and English in particular, we may not be able to rely on content support from home, homework support and tutoring. But that doesn't mean families don't want to be engaged in their child's learning. And what parent doesn't want to see their kids goal setting with a daily actionable task and see their reflections, these kickoffs, and see the plan and see their work? Like it can be really a key component to creating that foundation.
And then also creating some structure in the home, because there are many parents who are just winging it. Just like, oh, well, this is how we used to do it, so I'm just expecting this is going to happen. So it might be a way of structuring the home environment. And we know that brings some order to chaos and increases people's lives.
Right. And it's trying to take the conversation beyond, how was school today?
Yes.
Do you have homework? I don't know. Did you learn anything? No, I don't. Like, so we have a guide for families, and it explains this routine. It's all color, shows them the binder, and then it says here, it explains what the executive function is. But more importantly, ask them this. Check in with them about this. Like, shift that conversation. And all of this, you can talk digital all day long, but when the power goes out and I'm at home, imagine if I had a portfolio. I'm 2 months into the school year. I do this with my daughters. Like, okay, where's your notes and stuff on this? If we're going to try to do, I don't know where it is, right? Imagine it all being there. You can have it online, but it's an interesting tweak to blend learning. Of course, technology is important in digital assets and devices and tools, but this analog piece, writing my goals down, writing my reflections down, taking my stuff and physically organizing it, does something for that cognitive piece.
So I like the direction you're going in here, that there is a space for digital, there is a space where we use technology to assist us in at least learning these skills. And I know for a fact that you've got an online course on understanding the thesis around executive functions, and then you've got examples of how to implement it. Please tell us a bit more about the online course and how can teachers enroll in it?
Yeah. So our course, the latest course we offer, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's really, to be honest, designed. So Organized Binder, if a school adopts our program, we come in and there's training and support for the year, and we're partnering with you, and it's usually multi-years. But there's materials involved with that. We deliver all of that so that teachers don't have to. So we're reducing the cognitive load for teachers in a sense, right?
Which is needed.
Absolutely. But that you can also do this work without our materials. So in this last year, we designed and built and have released this course called How to Teach Executive Functions in Any Classroom. And it's essentially, how do I do Organized Binder without Organized Binder materials? And so to your point, it literally is a training modeling the kind of pedagogy or theory, all the stuff we're talking about, but then being very explicit and saying, here's exactly what it looks like in an Organized Binder classroom. And here's exactly what it can look like in a classroom that's using the same strategy, the same technique, the same rhythm and routine, but they don't have those materials. No problem. And then the fun challenge in that, which is why it could be a really great fit for educators in South Africa, is, okay, what might it look like in your environment? What's not going to change is the underlying foundation, that predictable routine, the modeling, But for your environment, you could borrow from either of these, but you might be like, I'm going to try it this way. I'm going to create that explicit routine this way. I'm going to create that portfolio this way. And so it goes through each of the executive functions. It goes through each step of that daily routine, and just uncovers it. So that, and I like to say this loud and clear, my work, whether Organized Binder or this course, it's built by teachers for teachers. You can get through this course. I mean, 2 hours, you'd be really slowing down and taking your time. And what I mean by that, Francois, first of all, online async course completion is poor, and we know that. So, and a lot of that, I think, is like, oh, I want to jump into this, but then it's like 5 hours of really great content or 3 days of really great content. There's no teacher on the planet that has that kind of time.
No.
And then you say, well, I'll do it on my break. I don't have the energy or the bandwidth on my break. So, but if I can get in and do it in 2 45-minute sessions or something, and it really has, and it's broken up that way too. Here's the daily routine, and then there's 4 other executive functions that are periodic. Makes it very accessible and easy to kind of get through, I guess.
I would immediately think, if I'm in our context, in South African context, if I am an HOD of a phase, a head of department of a phase or of a subject, or I'm a deputy principal at a school, I would want to enroll into this 2-hour-long program so that I can get the gist of the theory, understanding the executive functions, because that's going to give me solutions to what I can start implementing in the school.
Right.
So I'd say that that's kind of the level that because after doing that course, then we can, translate to our teachers. And if individual teachers want to do it, then they go onto the course. That's kind of the level that I'm thinking. Of course, individual teachers, it's an absolute, but definitely if you're an HOD that receives the complaints from your teachers in your group the whole time, but I'm struggling with discipline, the kids don't want to listen, I'm just not getting through my work, I'd say getting those level of educators, the head of departments, the deputy principals,
right,
on this online course, I strongly suggest that. So Mitch, how do teachers get onto this online course? Where do they go to get it?
Yeah, it's super simple, and I'm sure there'll be some show notes or something that you could look at, but go to organizedbinder.com/go, G-O.
Excellent.
And that's it. Organizedbinder.com. That's the website for the Organized Binder work. Go takes you to this course. And you bring up a good point. It's designed for an individual educator to dive in, and that's happening. And I'd add a layer for the department heads, the school leaders, and up, over here it's superintendents, whatever. What we've done is, if you want to see like a school-wide implementation, or at least exposure to this work, then what we do is we actually create, even though it's an async course, I'm doing it on my own time, we punctuate it with 1 or maybe 2 live Zoom calls with whoever's taken the course. Okay. So the head comes in, takes it or sees it, gets some exposure, and says, oh, I want these 10 teachers to go through it. But we're doing it now collectively as a group. So then we can say, well, now that we have a cohort, let's set a date by which you got to get this done, plenty of time, right? And then we meet live and we Q&A and we digest and debrief. And then ideally another one, maybe like a month later, Francois, where go try this stuff. And then let's check in and keep that work going. It can really kind of help ground it. So, awesome. But yeah, organizedbinder.com/go.
Excellent. Mitch, thank you very much for all of these insights. I'm very sure there's value bombs that our teachers will be able to use in the classroom just to improve the discipline. So I don't want to hear a lot of complaints from teachers again about discipline. There's ways of making this work. You just go to organizedbinder.com, and if you want to go to the online course /go. Mitch, from my side, thank you very much for teaching like a superhero and assisting other teachers in teaching like a superhero. You are definitely part of our Avengers and another superhero teacher that I'm glad to be friends with.
Absolutely. Me too, Francois. Thanks for having me.